Yes. Thank you. So you can go ahead now.
Yeah. Hi once again. I am greeting everyone who is present here. My name is Rusanda Kurke, and I am the directress of the Coalition of Independent Cultural Sector from Republic of Moldova. And in collaboration with the Belarusian Council for Culture and the Culture and Management Lab in Georgia, we are organizing a series of presentations with the invited cultural professionals from Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Romania, and Croatia, titled Inclusive Cultural Policies, Open Institutions, and Transparent Funding Mechanism for Culture in Eastern Neighborhood Region. So this is the fourth meeting. At the third seminar, we discussed the Ukrainian model of cultural fund. And today we will have a presentation on 21st century cultural policy and funding, lessons from Estonia, presented by Ragnar Siil. Ragnar is a former Estonian Undersecretary of the Arts and key expert of the EU Partnership Culture and Creativity Program. He coordinated the drafting of the Estonian Culture Policy 2014-2020 and 2021-2030 and currently he serves as the chairman of the Baltic Culture Fund, CEO of Creativity Lab and Cultural Policy Designers Network. So Ragnar will present the new Estonian Culture Policy 2030 and the key trends and principles in setting up a contemporary and future-oriented cultural policy framework. And I just wanted to mention that the project is supported by the Danish Cultural Institute through the New Democracy Fund. So Ragnar, I am passing you the mic and the stage, and then we will have a Q&A session.
Very good. Thank you, Rusanda. Thank you, Tamara, for inviting me. I see some faces that I know from my previous work. And for those that do not know me, it's a pleasure to meet you. So I will talk around 45 minutes, hopefully covering some of the themes that I think might be interesting. And then I'm more than happy to open up a debate, a discussion. I'm happy to answer any of your questions. I will talk about the Estonian model. That was what was asked. But I have worked with other countries as well. I have, when I was in the Ministry of Culture, worked for 8 years in the European Union expert group of culture creative sectors. I've been working with a number of culture policies around the world. And done a consultancy, also worked, as you mentioned before, worked with Georgia in developing their culture policy, Culture 2025, also working with Ukraine in developing their culture policy back in 2015, 16, 17. And I know many of the models have actually been taken as an example from Estonia, especially in Georgia. So some of it might be very familiar, some of it might be very new. Let's see what we can go through. I will share my screen and I have a presentation as well. So if you give me just quickly a moment. So, do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Very good. So let's talk about 21st century culture policy and funding and the lessons from Estonia. Now, do you see my second slide as well? Yes, very good. Sometimes it doesn't move on. So now you see. Actually, the first culture policy in Estonia was drafted in 1998. And this was a document which was called Principles of Guidelines for Culture Policy, and they were adopted by the Estonian Parliament. They actually were in force from 1998 until mid-2000s. when I started to work in the Estonian government in 2005, by that time, it was already clear that these policy guidelines are outdated. I mean, in 1998, or when they were written in 1996 and 7, you know, there were things that we were not part of the European Union. The understanding of the copyright issues, all the digital issues, the many issues that were not anymore relevant. So back then, the work started to renew the culture policy. As a state secretary, this was my responsibility. The work was launched in 2011. And by 2013, we, in 2 years, we finally adopted a new culture policy, Culture 2020. It was a deliberate act to put a year, 2020, because we were afraid that without that, we would have a document for another 15, 20 years. So we actually built in a time bomb that we need a new document in 6, 7 years. And that was exactly what happened. In 2018, a new process was started to renew it for the next 10 years. Then some changes, which I don't go into, this doesn't matter. But in 2020, it was clear that now we need quickly to finalize the process. The Minister of Culture came to me to coordinate that process. And last year, the government adopted new culture policy, Culture 2030. And this is something I just want to quickly talk about as well. If you look at the Ministry of Culture as such, then you could say that there are 3 key strategies that guide our work. It is the culture policy, or it's called the Culture Development Plan, 2022 to 2030. It is the sports policy, because Estonian Minister of Culture is also the Minister for Sport. And then everything related to the issues of integration of minorities, but also immigration and also people, the Estonian communities living abroad. That is covered by the another strategy called Cohesive Estonia. And those 3 are the key strategies. There are others, of course. For example, the Estonian Ministry of Education is responsible for the language policy. So the strategy for Estonian language and the development is carried out. And this is very much part of culture, but this is not what the Ministry of Culture is dealing with. And there are others as well related to the creative industries, culture diplomacy and others. But these 3 are the key for the ministry. And I have circled the first one because this is what I really want to talk about. Now, the new culture policy, I mean, I must say, we wrote it in Estonian, and I just making this presentation for you. I found out that because it is recently adopted, they had also translated it, and it has lost its charm in English, because in Estonian, everything it looks like a poetry. All the goals are, they have a poetic rhythm in it, and it uses all the words start with similar letters and all of it. Now it looks a bit bland, but anyway, that doesn't matter for you. What is Estonian culture policy about? What's the key message? So the overall vision is that Estonian culture is vibrant, evolving, and open to the world. Now, this is not just words, because as you know, in many places in the world, where the right-wing nationalism is rising up, the question of, should we capsule down? Should we protect everything? Should we kind of live in vacuum? Has become a very important question. So Estonian culture policy very clearly states that no, We do not want to be inward looking. We don't just want to be about traditions and protection and identity and, you know, not letting anything influence us. We want to be vibrant. We want to be in connection with outside world. We want to be open. We want to be inclusive. And that is a very, very important message throughout the document. And another point, which is in the overall vision, is looking at the participation. And it says that the participation in culture is a natural part of everyone's life, meaning that this is also I'm going to show in next slide how we measure this, the success or the efficacy of the strategy, how many people are involved in cultural activities regularly as a participant, as a creator, as an audience member, but in any way, but somehow involved. And the strategy, the policy is divided into three large categories. First, it's the sub-theme or objective is Estonian cultural life is strong and functional. That looks to the setup of the entire culture policy. It looks at the from institutions, supports, programming. It looks at salaries. It looks at social guarantees. It looks at capacity building. Everything that is composed in the cultural sector. The second part looks at the memory, kind of a heritage, Estonian culture memory is preserved and valued. Again, this is not to say that the first goal is about arts and the second one is heritage. No, it looks, it doesn't look sectorial. In every sector, even in art or performing arts or design or architecture, you have both. You have the functional system of the sector today, and then you have the heritage that is created and needs to be preserved, studied, kept for the future generations. And the third one looks at the role of culture in a wider society context. The goal says that the role of culture creativity in the development of society is valued, meaning that culture creativity play a critical role in development of other sectors, like it goes through economic, security, defense, diplomacy, sustainability, education, naturally, social rehabilitation, and many, many more. So this is the kind of a setup. What are we in Estonian culture policy measuring? What are we saying is that the indicators? Well, the overall indicator, the most critical indicator is the participation index. What's the percentage of Estonians participating in the cultural life in one form or another? This is research done on European level, so by Eurostat. It is every 2 years calculated. And actually, the 80% is more or less Estonian level. 73.8 was 2020 when it was Corona times. So even in the times of Corona and lockdowns, it still was 73.8%, which means that's the percentage of people that have taken part of cultural activity at least once in the last 12 months. So in 1 year, you've went to a gallery, a concert, a cinema, etc. And compare with other European countries, this is actually very high level that Estonia has. We also look at functionality, meaning that we look at the average gross monthly salary. I'm going to talk about salary slightly later, but the 82 and 90%, that is not just the government culture workers. That means everyone who works in the cultural sectors, meaning both in the municipal levels or private sectors, At the moment, the average of everyone in cultural creative sectors, the average salary is 82% of the national average. And we want this to be increasing. We have a specific goal for state culture workers. We also look at the satisfaction with the availability and accessibility of culture. We also look at how easy it is to access culture on the digital platforms. We also look at the awareness of Estonian and the importance for people, the Estonian cultural heritage. And we also look at the state of the cultural research in universities. Finally, we look at, in the creative industries point of view, we look at the value added to the GDP. We look at the value added per employee in the creative industry sectors. We look at the international visibility. That's the international index of all countries in the world. We look at the environmental impact. And finally, we look at the Estonian resident satisfaction with a living environment, because architecture and physical environment is also part of the culture policy. So this is how we, in the numeric terms, how we look if we are moving towards the goals set in the policy. Now, what are the few principles in the policy? I brought out, I think, 9 here, and just very quickly, but again, if you want to talk about some of them later, let's have a discussion. First principle. Look, I think what you have to say first about Estonia is that, you know, Estonia is considered one of the, well, at least economically most successful of the former Soviet Union, and one of the most successful in the Central Eastern Europe. It has been doing rather well, and also during the crisis economically. But also when it comes to the kind of the framework that I'm describing, I think you have to, we have to agree that very much is being taken over from the Nordic countries. And this has been, you know, our road for the past 30 years. So I think the setup of Estonian culture policy is very much what we would call Nordic. So the first thing that we look in the policy is depoliticization, meaning that it is very, very important that culture is not seen as an annex to politics. Culture sector has to have its guaranteed freedom of expression. In Estonia, there has not been cases of any political involvement in culture, no censorship, no meddling in or you know, even to the point of politicizing personnel decisions. And also this is important in terms of funding. So majority of funding is depoliticized. Even if it's the funding given by the ministry and it is signed by the minister, then the decisions, the expert groups are majority experts. So it is not politicians, it's not the minister alone. It is very, very important for Estonian culture policy to be neutral, to be peer-reviewed. And we're going to come back to this one when we talk about the endowment. Then it is very important that we talk about decentralization, that it means both on the level of local municipalities. A lot of cultural activities are actually responsibilities of the local municipalities. Myself, I'm working at the moment on many, many different regional cultural strategies and cultural programming. Some of the sectors are by law fully the responsibility of the local sectors, like libraries. And also it means decentralization in a sense that we have dismantled most of the state institutions and turned them into private foundations. Again, something I'm going to talk about slightly later, that is a very, very crucial change, and compared with many other countries, this has a significant impact on how culture sector is run in Estonia. Another very critical point, which has been in all three culture policies written down as a principle, is that the main criteria for funding decision in Estonia is the quality of the programming, not the judicial form, which means that everybody can apply. Doesn't matter whether you are private, you are profit, non-profit, you are foundation, you are NGO, you are state, you are municipal, it doesn't matter. And in most cases, you actually, for example, in the case of performing arts, then everyone is treated equally. So by the law, every theater has to get funding, has to apply equally. They have to hand in their, for 3-year funding, they have to apply their both economic and artistic plans. And then they have to defend them in front of the committee. So the state theater, state national drama theater, equally with a private theater. So they are treated equally. So the fact that you're a state doesn't give you any guarantee. Well, in principle, it does, because there's another element, which is the building. If the building of a theater belongs to the government, then the government has to take care of the building. And usually the buildings are most of the buildings, the government buildings, are actually belong to the government real estate agency. So it doesn't even, the theaters, the museums, they don't usually own the buildings that they are working in. They're kind of renting it from the state. But again, the principle is that you are treated equally despite the judicial form. Accessibility is extremely important, meaning that universal design, you have to get accessibility to culture throughout the human life cycle or lifespan, so from youth to elderly. Extremely important thing in Estonian culture policy is digital. You know, Estonia is an e-Estonia, the digital government, e-government. And I think Estonia is one of the few countries in the world, at least this was the first time in Estonia. The culture policy brings the main principles for all the culture sectors, as I mentioned, and then it has a specific theme sheet, like a specific chapter for every cultural sector. So for music, for literature, for arts, for every sector, by translating the general principles to that specific subsector. And for the first time ever, a digital culture is defined as a separate cultural field. So not just digital as part of others, so digital music or digital visual arts or digital performing arts, but the digital art itself is an art form completely with its own set of priorities, but also things like open data, artificial intelligence, etc. So blockchain, etc. These are the issues that are very much covered in the culture policy as well. Sustainable development, one of the pillars in the European Union, green, ecological footprint of your activities, and culture has a very important role, both as a sector that needs to look at its own ecological footprint, but also as a sector that can instigate change in other sectors. Then naturally, as a small country, let's remind there's 1.4 million people in Estonia, 1.4 million. We need to be open to the world. We need to be looking outside to the foreign markets. So internationalization and export is extremely critical in Estonia. Quality public space as part of architecture, as part of the kind of a physical space development. But also as a new theme, a quality public discussion space. This is a post-truth, post-argument, post-fact society where we need to take care that people know how to make the difference between truth and lies. And finally, of course, from Estonia, culture, creative industries, and entrepreneurship, something that is being very important for the past 10 years and continues to be. So this is the main 9 points that I wanted to bring out, but again, happy to discuss more. What is the system? Now, I'm not going to go into all of the details, but you have to understand that on the governmental level, you have a Ministry of Culture that also covers sports and integration. And then you have other ministries, and other ministries also play important role in culture's field. I already mentioned the Ministry of Education, which is important. And they also, for example, the youth culture, all universities belong there. So also art universities, conservatories, all of them are under the Ministry of Education, not the Ministry of Culture. But also, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture is one of the extremely important funders because they have the EU funds for the regional and local development. And a lot of regional and local development goes through culture and creativity, creative industries, local culture centers, libraries, community centers, etc. So actually, Ministry of Agriculture funnels millions to culture. And other examples. Under the Ministry of Culture, you have 3 types of organizations. Firstly, you have institutions of public law. There's only, I think, 4 of them, and they all have their own law, and they are National Opera. There is a National Library. There's an archive, State Archive, and also the Cultural Endowment. That's something I want to talk more, as this is the critical funding mechanism in Estonia. And then you have other institutions which divide into 2 categories. They used to be in 90s and early 2000s, they all used to be state culture institutions, like in your country. So you had a museum, you had a theater directly under the Ministry of Culture. In early 2000s, there was a shift to start reorganizing them into foundations. There is no public foundation law in Estonia, so essentially they work as private foundations, even though they are still government. Government has founded them, created them. It is the government that puts the board of directors, and they get the financing mostly from government. But it's still important because as they are run by their as private foundations, it means they are extremely flexible. They are run by the board of directors. Financing is extremely easy. The board of directors adopt the budget. They can change it any day. Everything they earn, they can keep. They don't have to give anything back to the government. The directors are not chosen by the ministry, but by the board of directors. Board of directors always have majority of experts. There's always 1 member of the Ministry of Culture, 1 member of the Ministry of Finance, and usually 3 to 5 members from the sectors. Somebody from business, somebody from the arts, somebody from specific community, etc. Some of the foundations are founded only by the ministry, but the others are founded, for example, together with the local municipality. So a theater that is based in the local municipality can be co-founded by the local municipality. For example, a museum of health is founded together with a university. A museum of sports and Olympics is founded together, government and the Olympic Committee. So you always find best co-founders that also care for the well-being of that particular theme. So by today, all theaters are foundations. Most of museums, except I think 3 or 4, but they are in the process of turning them into foundations. Almost all music organizations, symphony orchestra, Estonian concert, philharmonics, they are all foundations, and other organizations. State culture organizations are, for example, still like National Heritage Board and others. So this is good, and it is very important also because we found out in 2000s that when state culture institution is a suitable form for let's say National Heritage Board, you know, they are making sure that tangible heritage is kept, and you have regulations, and the owners treat, you know, their protected monuments according to the law. So they are more of a government function. But the cultural institutions often are on the crossroad of being a culture institution, but also a business. Theatre sells tickets, you have self-income, earnings, museums earn a lot of money. So we found out that being a government institution is not the best form for also acting as a business or as an economic organization. That's why we believe that cultural foundations work better than government institutions. So that's the overall thing. So let's put things in context as well, money-wise. Again, if you see that the numbers are very small, let me remind you that we are 1.4 million people. So we are a very, very small country. It's like one building in Kiev. That's how small we are. I just brought out 5 last years, including Corona. And you see that the amount of the budget of the Ministry of Culture is around 300 million euros. It also includes national television and radio, which is part of the culture policy. It was increasing. Then, as you can see, 2020-21, there was a drop because of the Corona and budget cuts as well. But then it has been now growing again, and it is set to grow further if everything goes well. So this is around the level. And I'm going to talk about the endowment, cultural fund, the Estonian Culture Fund as well. And before I start, let me just show you the budget as well. Then you can put it in a context. So this year it is around 33 million euros. Funding. It has been growing steadily. When I was working in the government 2005 to 2014, it was around 22, 23, 25 million. So it goes up around million every year it has been. So now it is around 33 million euros. But what is cultural endowment? So let me firstly say that cultural endowment is something that we are very proud. This is actually one of the first of its kind in the world. It was created in 1924, and in the First Republic before the war. It was very, very critical back then, and then it was immediately reinstated when Estonia got independence. It is the difference, and in the first, let's say, 10, 20 years, there was a problem that the difference between what the Ministry of Culture funds and what the Cultural Endowment funds was not always very clear. It is still not 100% clear, but I don't think it's even a problem. It was always seen also as a positive thing that there's a little bit overlapping, that you don't put all eggs in one basket, that if you don't get money from the Minister of Culture, then it's zero opportunity for you to do anything. So the idea was that you could get money from here or there. Now in the recent years, there has been more of a divide, meaning that there's a better understanding what is the role of one or another. More or less, you could say, more or less, that the Minister of Culture gives more of an institutional support, and Culture Endowment gives more of a project-based support. Minister of Culture gives for large scale, bigger project, and endowment gives a smaller project, and also grants for individuals, something that the ministry doesn't do. Ministry is giving more to the traditional project that has been going on for a long, long time, and nobody can imagine life without them. But Culture Endowment is more about new, experimental, projects that are, just up and coming. A Minister of Culture gives money to the nationally important and internationally important project, more expensive projects. And endowment also gives nationally important, of course, but then also looking more of a local and regional level, in addition to the national level. There is one more element in Culture Endowment. They also give, by the law, money for capital investments, meaning to the infrastructure, one object at a time. The parliament has made a list of the most important, most critical cultural infrastructure, and the Culture Endowment pays for this every year. I will just show it on the next slide. And another difference is that the Minister of Culture usually, there are a few exceptions like internationalization support, but usually the programs are once a year. So you apply once and you get the money for a year, but Culture Endowment is every quarter. So 4 times a year, 20th January, 20th April, 20th of, you know the rest. So you always know when it comes, and 4 times. So it's quick, it's easier. It all goes through the applications are all through the digital platform, which is both the same. So you have a one digital application platform for all state applications, both for the Ministry of Culture and Culture Endowment. And it's very simple, it's very easy, and it's automated, meaning that if a document or something is missing, you cannot apply. So it immediately shows you, if something is missing. Anyway, that's how it works. So Culture Endowment in numbers as well. Income. Now, in Latvia and Lithuania, you also have cultural endowments. They were created using the Estonian example, slightly later. But there's a big difference in Latvia and Lithuania. And the difference is that in Latvia, for example, they give money as a decision by the parliament every budget year. So they basically give the money, and that is the biggest difference between the Arts Council model and the endowment model. So usually arts councils are there to also have development activities, but also that they carry out the government financing kind of a mechanisms. Now, endowment gets money automatically. This money is not decided. This is written in the law that a certain percentage of the alcohol and tobacco tax, a certain percentage of the gambling tax, and also other sources, like somebody who dies can make a will or gift money, and they also invest money. So the budget of the culture endowment is not part of the political debate. It is automatic. And that's the best thing in Estonian culture policy. There is no debate on whether we should cut or not cut. It comes if times are rough, if taxes go down, it goes down. If times go up, then taxes go up. Usually it goes up quicker, as you saw, but this is the critical element of the endowment. Around 50%, I told you around 33 million euros. So around 50% of that comes from alcohol, tobacco, 50% comes from gambling, and a little bit more from others. From cost perspective, 65% of that 33 million goes to the grants and projects. Around 29% goes to the infrastructure, and 4% goes to the admin. And the way it is built up is that within the endowment, you have councils. You have a council for sport, music, film, heritage, visual arts, performing arts, literature, and architecture. And their budgets are on the slide, as you can see, from 2.3 to 1.5 million. That is for annually. So each of the council divides that money. Then in addition, you have regional, we have 15 regions. So each of them have around 100, a little bit more, thousand euros for small local projects. And all projects that are covering more than one sector, they are being decided in addition to that money in the big council. So each of the sectors, sport, music, film, cultural heritage, etc., send one representative to the big culture endowment council, and they make the decisions for cross-sectorial projects. So this is how it works. It is very important that there are no ministry officials or politicians in any of the councils. They are only sector representatives. The sector representative organizations propose every 2 years candidates. Ministry makes a selection. The committees are selected for 2 years, and then any person can be in the council consecutively 2 times, so 4 years, and then they have to leave. So it is peer review that always changing, and no ministry official or politician is allowed to be in that council. Now, 2 last slides. So I was kind of thinking of, okay, this was funding. What are the key elements we might discuss today what you might be interested in looking more specifically to the Estonian culture policy? And I was still thinking about budgets and financing and kind of models. And I brought out 8 things. So again, if you want to hear anything more about those 8 or anything else, then just ask me later. Number 1, COVID. Everybody wants to know how this was covered. Estonia was not very much lockdown. We have been quite open. You know, we joked, if you know Estonians, then we hated the 2-meter rule, because we were kind of counting minutes when the 2-meter rule ends so that we can go back to our normal 5-meter rule. It's an empty country. It's a big country with a few people. So we kind of managed quite well in terms of lockdowns, but of course our cultural institutions suffered a lot from collapse of tourism, for example. So in 2020, the first year, the government gave 25 million euros to the sector to cover the COVID-related costs. And last year, it was 42 million euros. Basically, what this money did was that again, this money went to not just the government, but all. So not dependent on whether you were government or non-government or local, all institutions. And basically what they covered was the difference between normal year before the crisis and degrees of the budget in 2020 or 21. So most of the museums and organizations I work with, they have ended the 2020 and 21 with zero. So no profits, but no losses. So government basically covered the loss, so they are zero. Of course, everybody looks again to this year, what it might happen. Of course, the electricity and the gas prices and the war and, you know, all other issues, but this is important. Second important element, which was decided already in the last culture policy and has been continuing, is that while the ministry worries for all the salaries of the cultural sector, it can take the direct responsibility of its own people first. So the people that work in the government sector, in those institutions, both the state institutions, public law institutions, or foundations. And there it has been agreed in the policy that the state takes the aim of having the national average salary as the minimum for the full-time cultural institution employee for the position that requires higher education. Because this was decided in 2013, the average salary has increased tremendously from around 750 euros to this year it is 1,400 euros. So this is now it's not the average salary, this is the minimum salary. So no person who works in the state cultural institution full-time on a position that requires higher education cannot earn less than 1,400 euros. So that scheme is something that you might be interested to discuss. There is a problem with this as well, because when the government in the last 10 years has prioritized raising the minimum, which means that all people on a lower spectrum, so all people earning the minimum, are growing fast. But then those in the higher positions, there's not enough money to increase their salary at the same amount, which means that the difference between the lowest earning and the middle manager and the top manager is getting smaller. So now, for example, this year, the directors were allowed to a certain percentage to give also to the higher positions extra to actually motivate, higher positions and the middle management as well. So it's not just all ideal and all perfect, but at least the state culture workers do not earn, few hundred euros or 1,000 euros anymore. The third issue is that if you look at in all of our countries, if you look at the different subsectors, we all see a phenomenon that some of the sectors are covered with institutions. So there's institution for theater, so actors, there's institution for musicians, concert organizations, museums, libraries, but there are no institutions, there are no government guaranteed stable jobs for writers or artists often. And Estonian government agreed in the last culture policy in 2020, and it is now growing this program to appoint artist and writer salaries. At the moment, it means that 5 people, 5 artists and 5 writers, meaning 10 artists and writers together, get for 3 years 1.1 times the 1,400, so 1,540. So this is guaranteed. They can then just focus on working on their art. They don't have to do anything else. They can, but they don't have to. And after 4 years, there's another competition and another 5 artists and 5 writers are selected. So this is basically a government paid system. And why it's different than just a grant is that it covers all the social guarantees as well. Health insurance, pension and everything. And there's agreement to increase that number to 15 and 15. So altogether 30, from 5 and 5 to 15 and 15. But this is now being increased, and the new culture policy says that there is now an increase both in the amount that they get, but also the number of people that get it. The fourth element that is very important in Estonia, and also now in the COVID times, proved to be excellent. Really a life-saving system, and that is the Creative Persons Act. So for quite a long time, this is not a new law. This has been more than, I think, 12, 13, 14 years. There is a law where all creative people who do not earn anything. Now, I used to, when I went to the government, I made a huge mistake, and I said in one meeting, when creative people are unemployed. And then I was quickly made clear that creative people are never unemployed. They are only on creative break. So it's very important to never call it unemployment. So it's not an unemployment benefit. But if a creative person who under the law is creative person has not earned anything, he has an automatic right to apply for 6 months support. This is the minimum unemployment benefit. And also all taxes are paid for it, all social guarantees, health insurance is all paid from this. So the people get this year 654 euros a month. So 6 months it's guaranteed. And then if you still don't earn anything, you apply extra, you can be given another 6 months. So altogether 1 year. And then if you get it 1 year, then there has to be 2 year difference. You can't get it, and then again, you can start getting it. So this is important. Now, why this is so important for the culture sector is that this is not like some kind of a fund that the money sits there, and then if you go and apply, and then you get money, and if you don't apply, the money stands there. No, every year, this money, so you see on the slide, this year it is 1.74 million euros altogether. This is given out and divided according to the average number of creative people in different artistic fields. It is given to the artistic unions, writers union, composers union, designers union, etc. So they all get their share. They keep the money and they wait if somebody comes and applies for this unemployment or this, not earning anything and getting that support. Before COVID, very few people did. Maybe I remember when I was in the government, usually 1 year, maybe 40 people got it. But what to do with in the end of the year, a lot of money is left. I mean, 1.7 million euros, what to do? All of that money next year that was not used can be divided as grants. So this is another important funding mechanism for sectors. So they can get money for production, they can get money for travel, they get money for all sorts of things. And again, new money comes in. This money cannot be used this year, only for the social benefits. And if it's not used, then next year it is divided as grants. So this is another important tool. And why I said this was so important for COVID, because when COVID hit and there was a government support for individual artists, freelance artists, then we didn't have to create any new system. It was already there. Government just put a lot of more money in, and everybody had this, knew how to do this. And I think this is a final slide. Four more, maybe there are smaller things. For visual arts, very important tool in Estonia is commissioning of artworks. So it's called the percentage law. I think that I wrote to the Georgian Culture Policy also. So 1% of all public buildings, of the budget of the public buildings goes to the art, up to 65,000 euros. And this actually every day, every time, whenever you go to the system, there's at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 competitions going on, and our public space is enlightened with beautiful art, whether it's schools, whether it's government buildings, whether it's prisons, doesn't matter, it's all included. Another important thing from this year, government launched a specific tool modeled in the example of Norwegians called the cultural rucksack. We call it the cultural backpack for children, to allow more children, school children, to go to the cultural institutions and cultural activities. And 1 million was given this year to launch the program. Naturally, creative industries mechanisms, and you know, many of you know, Estonia is very active in this field. We are financing incubators in creative sectors. We have in each subsector, we have development centers, we have export measures and spillover effect measures. So last funding period of EU, we had 20 million euros plus national funding, and the next period is not yet decided because it is now being concluded for the next 7 years. And something that you have it in Georgia, at least, I don't know all the other countries, is the film commission system, Film Estonia in Estonia, 2 million euros, giving up to 30% of cash rebate for the production. Again, very, very successful program. It has brought huge productions. Maybe the most known is Christopher Nolan's Tenet. If anyone saw it a few years ago, Tallinn was a place for Kiev, and Kiev Opera Theatre. It's quite close to where I live. But anyway, these are the kind of measures that I wanted to highlight from the funding side. And that's it. But I hope that you have questions, and I'm happy to answer and discuss with you. Thank you very much.
I would just suggest that people can raise hands so that we can switch on their mics. Those who have questions. If no one is jumping in, I would have one question. So you mentioned that a lot of state institutions were transformed into private enterprises. Did you mean by that all these institutions that functioned under the Ministry of Culture and which are now these private funds and they operate? And so my question would be, which is really always a thing that our ministry is very much afraid of, because these plans to create a special creative fund was halted at the moment, because if everything goes out from under the control of the ministry, what are they going to do? So what is the ministry in Estonia working on?
Exactly. I mean, that's the change in mindset. When I went to the government, when I went to the ministry and worked as Undersecretary, and we also decided to give out or give away many small scale funding programs, because they were copy-pasting exactly the work of endowment. So we said we should not do that. We should instead we should let endowment do what they do, and we should just fund bigger, as I mentioned, bigger, more important, nationally important things. And then there was a little bit of the same discussion. Yes, but if you give away from the ministry those even small funding, like a few €100 or €500 or €1,000 programs, you lose the power to influence. Who should live? Listen, in the Nordic mindset, the Northern Europe, you do not win power and authority by giving €500 or €300 to somebody. Your role is to do policy. That's I'm not in the government anymore, but government is about policy. It's not about giving specific funds. Now, the same question what you just asked, Tamara. In Estonia, we from our Soviet past, but probably that Estonia has been in the world #1 or #2 in the media freedom. We are #1 in the internet freedoms. We are a country which values extremely a lot the non-censorship. So even a hint that the government, even those board of directors of those foundations, who are, as I said, majority sector representatives, but still by law, I mean, the minister of culture appoints them. So you could still say that there's a minister appoints the 5 or 7 board of directors, and then they could go and discuss the artistic plan, for example. If that would happen, I tell you, there's a huge scandal. There has been few cases, not the government going into, but even when the government, for example, there was if you're interested in this, I mean, last year we had like in many countries, we have this ultra-right party, let's say this Trumpist kind of a party in the opposition. And we had the National Art Museum renovated and updated their permanent exhibition. And during doing that, they also renamed some of the paintings. And of course, and when it said nigger, now it says blackhead. So, you just go with times. And of course, this caused a huge scandal in the ultra-right circles. And the Minister of Culture had to, go in the parliament and answer to the parliamentarians. Why from Brussels and from US, why do you change name? In our language, that word doesn't mean anything. You know the usual argumentation. But the main focus of the talk was not whether you should or should not rename a painting, but was that in Estonia, Minister of Culture or Minister of Culture is not telling the museum what to name the painting. It is not saying the artistic director of a theater what to put in a play and what not to put in a play. So there's a very, very clear difference between the economic and kind of functional management of the institutions and the artistic. And as everybody's looking carefully that no politician would intervene into the artistic. So again, this is a mindset, Tamara. If you agree with the mindset that the authority of the government doesn't come from telling what pieces to bring on stage or who to give money, but rather create systems, then this works. And if you are not allowed, if you're not able to do that, then you should keep giving €100 grants to everybody.
Thank you very much. Now I switched the mode so everyone can unmute themselves, but so that not everyone talks at the same time, it would be still very good to raise the hand. And I think Rusanda also had a question.
Yeah, I wanted just, I'm not sure if I understood the model of the cultural endowment. It is under the ministry, or it's at the same status as a ministry, or what kind of model it is? It's under the government, or it's...
Yes. So it's called, it's a legal person under public law. It's in many countries. It is like public broadcasting. So it is an institution. It is, if you draw organogram, if you draw the model, it is under the Ministry of Culture, because the Minister of Culture is the chairman of the General Council of the Endowment. So he chairs the meeting of, as I mentioned, every council sends one representative to the big council. So it is the minister that is by its position, the chairman of the council. But that is the end of the connection between the ministry, because ministry has zero impact over the budgets, because as I mentioned, basically ministry is just like a wire that transfers the money. So the Minister of Finance sends it to the Minister of Culture. Culture automatically forwards it to the institution, and it cannot participate in the decisions of the council or anything. So it is kind of independent, protected institution which gets its money automatically and not by the political decision. But this is institution in a sense, and it's not very big. I think there's maybe 15 people working there, maybe 20 people working, one for each council, and then few more. So it's a small institution for 33 million people, 33 million euros.
I don't see anyone raising the hand.
Oh, there are.
There are? Really?
CNC Moldova.
Oh, great.
Moldova, CNC Moldova, for example.
Yes, please.
Thank you. A quick question. You told about this foundation, yeah? That the governmental institutions switch it to foundations. This is a very interesting model, and I know in other countries as well, it works in Israel, for example. I'm just curious, what is the status of this institution, and what is the guarantee that the money will come from national funds? Yeah. I saw you have in this cultural endowment just the fund for cash rebate law. But as I know, the former Film Institute, now the foundation, they have another money as well. So they came from national budget directly. And where is the guarantee that they will come? As far as you are not a governmental institution, because maybe other fund can be created, yeah.
Yes. So let me. It's in some countries there's a laws for two different types of foundations. There are private foundations and public foundations. And in that case, what I talked about, that would be a public foundation. The only thing is that in Estonia, so public foundation meaning it is created by the government. It's just different. It is not like a ministry or a state institution with rights to, I mean, fine somebody or, you know, certain legal rights that come as a government institutions. Foundations, they have more independence, more flexibility, etc. Now, in Estonia, the difference is that there is no law on public foundations. That's why I say there's a law on foundations, in a kind of a private foundations, but they are still government founded. So the founder can be a government alone, government and the local municipality, government and private sector, whoever, you know, comes together and found it. So you asked about guarantee. Well, again, because you are founded by the government, that is your guarantee. It is as much as guarantee as if you are a government institution. If you're a government institution and the government decides not to give you funding, then, you know, what's the guarantee? Then they close you. Then, you know, or, you know, you die out. So, but there are, of course, contracts. So, for example, I mentioned you that majority of museums are foundations. Okay. So, but the collections cannot be given over to somebody else. Collections are owned by the government. So the logic is that the government then creates a foundation alone, or again, I mentioned with an NGO or with a local municipality or alone, doesn't matter, creates a foundation and then signs the contract with which the foundation gets to keep the government collections. And the government guarantees with that contract a funding for upkeeping that collections. But again, this is a contract. If I decide that you do a bad job, I just end the contract, take back the collections, and then I get rid of you. I mean, for example, one theater that happened. One national theater many years ago, the most successful Estonian theater internationally, called No 99. No 99, number 99, was because it was created to be final in one day. So they were created to make 99 pieces. So every piece was, you know, no 95, no 90, no 80, no 70, no. And many years later, they were foundation. They went to foundation, everything. I was even in the board of directors. And then at one moment, they decided to stop. They didn't have good venue. They didn't have enough seats. They were not economically sound. The artistic team was tired. It was very much like a visionary theater, you know, a theater around one visionary, you know. And then the board of directors made a proposal to the government that they should be closed down. And they were closed down, naturally, nicely. Everything was handed over. They paid everything and they left. So it was, I mean, it can happen, naturally. I mean, still the most, sometimes people are, so what's the difference? I mean, in some countries, the government institutions are so flexible that you don't need that foundation. That's also possible. But in Estonia, and I know in many of your countries, if you're a state institution, it's extremely bureaucratic. You know, to get money, you know, you are given money to specific lines. If you want to change money between the lines, you cannot. You have to go back and ask for it. Secondly, if you earn money, more money then you have to give it back to the government. You cannot keep it. Then what happens with the money that goes over the budgetary year? If you're not spending all of it, what happens then? Who said, these kind of questions are no more, because you give as a government just one line, just a amount. Then the institution, the foundation, makes their own budget. They can change it every day. They can change the budget every day. They select their directors, make their own competitions. And for the ministry, this was very important, because in Estonia, we are a very small country, as I mentioned. Ministry of Culture is a system where every sector has one advisor. So you have one museum advisor, one theater advisor, one music advisor, one literature. So every sector has advisor. And when you are a state institution and directly under the government, under the ministry, then basically the ministry, the poor one advisor, has to know the details of all its institutions, like what's happening to the contracts, and are you in bankrupt, are you laundering, everything. It's impossible. It's impossible. Now at least you have a middle level, because the board of directors, they have a responsibility to work with the director. Every, there's a rules what they have to go. Every month they have to look at certain things. Every quarter, certain things. They have to go deep into how well is the economic situation of the organization. So there's at least one level, 5 people to 7 people, depends on the size of organization, that deals with, is a partner for the director of that foundation as well. Otherwise, you don't have a partner, because the ministry cannot be your partner. So anyway, that is why I believe it's a good model. Thank you.
Yeah, just our law doesn't allow governments to be a fundator, or founder of any non-profit institutions. But that's a good model, actually. Yes.
But yeah, okay. Foundations. I mean, foundations are not, in a sense, they can be very profitable, but yes, they don't take out dividends as such. So yes, that's true. Rusanda has a question.
As I understood, the cultural endowment, they are financing all institutions in the country: state institutions, NGOs, private institutions, and individuals. Project based.
They can, but that is the part of the rule that I mentioned. That there's a rule that state institutions or those institutions that get money from the government for their main activities, they should not go to the endowment for support. So there's an agreement. I mean, by law they could, but there's a criteria, and then it basically says you cannot. So if you're a theater, you are government foundation theater, you get money from the government, you cannot go and ask. That's the division I mentioned, that, if you already get from the government, let the others that don't get from the government, smaller theater, project theaters, they get from the endowment. However, there's a one exception. If a theater applies, or museum applies for something that is not their usual work. So for example, and sometimes it's not black and white, but let me bring you an example. If a theater is celebrating its, 100 years and organizing an exhibition, that is not the theater's main work. They have not get their funding to make exhibition. So if they make that as a project, they can apply. If a museum makes an exhibition, that's the main thing. So they shouldn't ask for, but if they make, for example, a conference, they could go and apply. So if a conference is not usual part of, annual project, so there is a certain limit, but general rule is that you should not apply from endowment if you are already fully financed by the government.
Another question, if the endowment is covering 100% of the budget, of it requires co-funding?
Always go and self-financing, of course.
How many percent do you know?
No, it depends. It depends. There are a few that it depends slightly on. I think it is 20. I need to check it. In different. I run one of the councils, which is the Baltic Culture Fund. That is a fund which is co-financed by 3 governments: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and is meant for projects that one partner, at least minimum one partner from each countries, are organizing joint events outside of the 3 countries. So, for example, in biennales and festivals, etc. And I think there is it's 20% is the co-financing. You can give less; they usually give less money than you ask. But if they give you less money, they need to also say for which they like what is the. You just can't say that we want everything you applied for, but we give you half the money. So if we give you half the money, for example, in our, we have to state where we are happy that you cut your project. So, maybe half the events, maybe one less country, maybe you are too big salaries, we have to show where we are happy with cutting.
And also, if the endowment is supporting multi-annual projects. Multi-annual,
the project can be multi-annual, but the council funds only once, so it doesn't give you multi-annual security. The ministries, there are ministry funds, like for example for performing arts, that are multi-annual. So you can actually apply for 3 years and you get the security for 3 years. But in foundation, because as I mentioned, every quarter there is a call, so they don't take obligations over the period. No, so you can just apply many times.
Okay, thank you.
Vahtang.
Hello, Ragnar. Thank you for a great presentation. My question is about if there is a separate strategy for creative industries in Estonia, and if yes, how does it relate to cultural strategy? Thank you.
We've always said, I started to work with creative industries back in 2005. I was the first person in Estonia who had the word creative industries in the job description. We were given money immediately when we started. We saw it as an innovative way, so we didn't need strategy to get money. And ever since, we have not had a separate strategy. No, we were too busy spending money. 7 million first period, 20 million second period. So we didn't need money. But that's, in a sense, I'm joking a bit. So we do not have a separate strategy, but our strategy is to have creative industries included in other strategies, because we don't believe that creative industry is a thing in itself, but it is a connector. So you have a creative industries in culture policy. It's part of it. You even have, as I mentioned, every subsector has its own chapter, and creative industry has its own sub-chapter. So it is there. It's also in the national innovation policy. It's national EU funds policy. It is a national export policy. So that is because this is where the money is. Why do you need to create their own strategy which doesn't have any money when you can have it in the places? So yes, the answer is that we don't have it separately, but creative industries is part of it. It is clearly in the Culture 2030 document as well.
Thank you.
Ragnar, thank you for your presentation. Usually we discuss in English, Russian. Can I continue this tradition?
You can speak Russian. I'm not sure I understand.
Not you can answer in English, but my question in Russian. Okay.
No, let's try.
Okay, Ragnar, thank you. Because I want to give very correct my answer. Yes. Да, ты говорил вот про фонды, которые создаются при театрах, да? Кто является учредителями этих фондов? Это организации или это люди конкретные? Насколько далеко они имеют автономию от государственных учреждений, то есть от театров? Насколько у них автономия развита? Да, что они могут привлечь инвестиции в театры. Кто руководит этими фондами? Это первый вопрос. Можно сразу второй или сперва ответишь, а потом...
Let me try answer first. So each foundation is run by a director or a chairman. And that chairman is selected by the board of directors. So as I mentioned, usually there's 5 people or 7, depends, but let's say 5 people, 1 representative from the Ministry of Culture, 1 representative Ministry of Finance, and 3 from the sector, from theater, from municipality, from usually business.
Is it for fund from for theater? I
Each
asked
theater
about
has its own.
in theater.
Yes. So we have 8 theaters working like foundations, like you mentioned, 8. And in those 8, you have each of them have 5-member board of directors. And they are the highest level of government. They decide everything. They decide the budget. They decide the reports. They select the director. In Estonian law, if you are a director, if you are the chairman of the board in the foundation, you can be fired without announcement. So you don't have a, usually it is for 5 years. But if we decide as a board of directors that we need tomorrow, we need a new director, we can call you back immediately. Yeah. So as I mentioned, and they have the autonomy. I mean, from the ministry, they have the full autonomy. Now, you usually have in the law as well, it says that the theater has to have an artistic director. And then the artistic director have a full autonomy over the artistic matters, the programming. And that is, as I mentioned, where the board of directors do not go into. The only thing that they debate is whether the artistic plan is financially suitable. So if you want to make 5 West Side Stories, but we don't have money for this, so we might have a problem. But we do not question your artistic decisions based on you know which authors you choose, etc. So yes, it is not government that the minister. Let me bring you an example. It used to be when we turned theaters from state institutions to foundations. And in doing this, you know, you go through all the bookkeeping. And we found out that one director had really almost caused a bankruptcy. so took a huge financial loss. We didn't know this before because he was so clever. He was always selling next year tickets earlier. So took from next year money in, covered this year, then next year had to even, you know, that's how it, and we didn't know this in the ministry. Then we made a foundation. Foundation went into documents and found it. Now, at one moment, the government, the minister lost complete trust in that director. And the minister who had appointed the board of directors told them that, please, I do not trust that director. Please, you know, get rid of him. But the board of directors didn't. So how can a minister then fire the director? The only way is to fire all the board of directors, appoint new 5 people, and they might then, so you see, the minister cannot touch the director. Only thing is through the board of directors. So you see that, so it's still possible. I mean, it's still the government, it's still public, but it's not directly. It's not like, oh, I don't like you, I fire. It is not possible.
Thank you. И второй, когда ты представлял фонд, эстонский фонд, да, ты говорил там про приоритеты, да, 8 или сколько там приоритетов, которые финансируются по суммам конкретным. Скажи, эти приоритеты как-то меняются через года, или они остаются вот на долгое время одни и те же?
The proportions remain more or less, but the money comes, the more and more money comes in. So it is more or less the proportions, and sometimes the big council debates. So I didn't go into detail. It is also historic. Somebody already mentioned this example. So for example, in films, there's a council on films, audiovisual council, and they have I think if I looked at this, they had 2.1 million euros. Okay, now they are very different fund because, as it was mentioned, there is a film fund, Estonian Film Institute. That is a national film center. The government gives them 5 million euros for Estonian film production. So the main film production, the main film development, and the big full feature films, they all go through Film Institute and the public money. And then the 2.1 million in the foundation council for audiovisual, that is more to support that. That's more for small production, documentaries, short films, animated films, you know, those films that do not maybe get money from the big, but also even to individual grants, grants for studying abroad in other universities, grants for going to international festivals, grants for going to trainings, even if an old elderly film guru has a jubilee, you know, or even when they die and funeral has to be organized, you know, this is really where individuals are taken care from, you know, from young to old, but also some films are co-financed from there. So that's all. So they maybe get a bit less, but some other sectors don't have any other fund. So that's the only fund. So you see, there is a slight difference there. it's historic as well.
Ну и последний вопрос, Рагнар, спасибо, ты уже устаешь. Но еще один вопрос. Скажи, пожалуйста, вот акцизы, которые идут на культуру, да, с алкоголя и табака. Да, деньги идут прямо от предпринимателей к фонду, или они сперва идут в бюджет, а потом бюджет в этот отправляют фонду?
Yes, бюджет и тогда фонд. So in the law, there's a percentage. Like, for example, government takes all alcohol and tobacco access, and 3.5% of that is then given to the fund. So.
Thank you very much.
Oberlicht.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I have a few questions also as others. I hope I also ask questions that other people have in mind. So my name is Vladimir, just to be clear. So what is, I wonder what is the difference between the budgets that, I mean, I don't know if we can actually compare, because the Ministry of Culture has its own budget and the endowment has this 33 million for projects. I believe, I don't know how to formulate, but what would be the fund that Ministry of Culture distributes on institutions, on cultural institutions activity, compared to the endowment? How different are those funds? And in relation to it, the question would be, what is the rate of applications that the endowment receives from NGOs compared to state institutions? I mean, how balanced are these two? Like, I don't know if it's clear.
Well, for all cultural institutions, I mean, that 300 million is what is given. I mean, that's the ministry's own budget is, I mean, the admin budget is quite small compared to everything. So, I mean, Estonian culture as a structure, all the buildings and all the institutions and collections and theaters and public broadcasting and you know, venues and everything, that is the Ministry of Culture. That's the 300 million euros. And the NGOs, the life that is, you know, the bubbling cultural field, that is mostly that 30 million. So that's it. And if you add the rate between NGOs and the government, I really mean, there are very, very few state institution applications in the endowment. Very few. I mean, there are thousands and thousands from the non-governmental sector, because, as I mentioned, there are nine different, so 8 councils, and then the regional is actually 15. So 15 regions. So all just together. So all together you have something like, plus you have separate funds as well. You have like a council for translations, book translations. You have a separate for Baltic Culture Fund, as I mentioned. You know, so I have others as well. But all together you might have something like, on top of my head, something 22, 23 councils. And altogether they receive, I don't know, I don't have the number, but thousands and thousands of applications a year. And out of that, state institutions, very few. Maybe, I don't know, maybe for 5,000 applications, maybe 50. Because, as I mentioned, they are not allowed to ask for their activity because they already get it from the ministry. They only can ask for separate activity that is not their usual work. So really, this is meant for the non-governmental freelance private sector cultural operators mostly. Plus, what was important, there is this special thing because the fund gets the money directly from the taxes, so it's guaranteed. There was 10 years ago or so, even more, a change in the law. So the parliament gave more money. So it wasn't taken from the NGOs. They gave it more money and said that from that more the percentage that was given, something like, as I mentioned, 29% of 30. So it's around 8 million euros, something like that, around 8 million out of that 33. That is every year given to the national important cultural investment. So that is decided by the parliament. At the moment, they are paying the national Estonian National Museum. Next year, this is the last year they paid. It's over, it's paid. It was 100 million euros or something. And now Parliament decided already 4 new objects to be, and they are in the line and they start one by one. So again, first one is taken, then the endowment pays 9, 10 million euros every year until it's done, then the next one. So that is also there, but that's a separate thing. That's what I mentioned.
So actually it's not 33 million, but 20.
Yeah, it was 65% in one of my slides. 65% of that 33 goes to the grants and projects. So if you take 33 million times 30, so it is 22 million. So 22 million goes to the NGOs this year.
Yeah, I also.
Sorry, Vladimir. Nino, can you just turn off your mic? Thank you.
I was visiting Estonia recently, and I kind of saw a big discrepancy in this. I don't know, contemporary art. You have few, at least in Tallinn, you have few. I wouldn't say self-organized, but kind of art factories there with a lot of initiatives inside, and they like live their own life separately from on the hill what happens in the parliament or in the cultural main venues. It seems like there is a big separation from this kind of independent cultural scene and the state. Maybe I would call it like state-funded cultural institutions, as you explained, this model of foundation. So it's kind of visible. I don't know if it's also reflected in this division of budgets that 300 million goes basically to state funded institutions and 10% of it goes to, and it didn't seem that it's kind of enough. At least talking to the people there, they were not like happy with that they receive enough support from the government or they are visible for the government. They were actually complaining that the government doesn't care even for what is going on in their courtyards there. But in this situation, can I ask additional question? Rusanda asked you about endowment. My question is if there is also institutional support which endowments offers to NGOs, because often we see this discrimination between supporting a governmental institution which has a space, has employees and salaries, and then they do an additional project, but then NGOs usually don't even have a space or don't have salaries. At least it's kind of rare when you see this. So if there is any institutional support which endowments gives through this endowment fund. Sorry, it's too many things.
No. I mean, first of all, I mean, I agree absolutely. I mean, firstly, I think partly, and maybe this sounds a little bit patronizing, but you know, that's in a definition of being independent, that you are independent of what's happening in the parliament and in the government. So it absolutely, like everywhere. And also, I would really think that something would be very, very wrong if you would find somebody who would say that there's enough money. I don't think that anybody says there's enough money. we are post-communist country, small country, compared with our neighbors. I mean, we might be doing much, much better than many others in the East. But, you know, if you look at our prices, the living standard, you know, we are now surpassing GDP-wise. We've passed Portugal, we passed Spain, Greece already. So if I showed you even 1,400 euros a minimum salary, that's not much. I mean, I know what's the average salary in Moldova or Georgia. I know this, so it's big difference, but it's not much in this country, absolutely. Or you get the unemployment benefit of 654 euros a month if you have nothing else. It's not much. I mean, it's very little. But again, most of those that you talk to, most of the visual art, contemporary art, performing arts individuals in those factories. I actually work in one of those factories. My own office is in Telliskivi, for example, which is one place for the organizations. I don't know anyone who is not funding their activities without cultural endowment. So cultural endowment is important. Answer to your question, yes, they can be paid project management fees and things like that. But if I'm not mistaken, then answer is no. They cannot get institutional support. However, I just wanted to correct one thing that might be misleading. That 300 million from the government, the ministry, and all of that. This is not only for government institutions. That's what I mentioned. I mentioned you that, for example, all government theater funding under the Performing Arts Law, which is, I mentioned that everyone, despite your local government or private theater, you have to equally apply. So all of them, including private theaters, get money from the ministry. All bigger festivals, Tallinn Music Week, the Black Night Film Festivals, jazz festivals, theater festivals, they get from the ministry. And in some cases, if the ministry takes over it completely, for example, in Biennale, Venice Biennales, then the ministry takes over everything 100% and says to the endowment, do not take care of that anymore because we take it care. So it's not just the government institution. So you can't say that 300 million goes to the government institutions and 30 goes to the private. No. A lot goes to the private as well. But again, if you are small, if you are independent niche, and especially in the areas where you have lack of institutional framework. So, for example, music is much better covered. So you have music institutions, a lot of them. You have your philharmonies, you have both on national level, you have concert agency, you have a symphony, you have philharmony, you have the local level, you have Tallinn Philharmonics, then you have endowment for music, but then you have a full more than €1 million funds for independent concert organizers and festival organizers from the ministry. So the ministry gives, in addition to the endowment, a few millions to the music. And now just I helped to get Tallinn as a UNESCO music city, as Batumi in Georgia, UNESCO City of Music. So now Tallinn City also, for the first time, created its separate funding mechanism for music. So if you're a musician, you have so many more places to apply than if you are, for example, visual artist or you're a dance artist, for example. So again, there's a big discrepancy, absolutely. No question about that. And the only thing that the government has managed to do, which is nearly not enough, is that writer and artist salary. So that was the answer. say, okay, we don't have an institute. Well, they have one institution. They have the Kunsthalle, the art hall in Tallinn. But they say, okay, we have 5 and now we are increasing it to 15. So at least 15 people, artists and 15 writers get to be on government salary for 3 years. But again, this is not enough, naturally. More is
just to understand, so does it mean that the private initiatives, NGOs, can go for institutional support to Ministry of Culture fund and apply there with
depends now on, yes, depends on the type. So if it's theaters, yes, they can. If it is concert organizers and independent music collectives, they can. There is a yearly support. Creative industry centers, so Design Center, Architecture Center, Music Estonia, Estonian Center for Contemporary Art, they all get also institutional support from the ministry. I think 150,000 euros a year or something. So yes, absolutely. If you're a dance artist, if you're a dance company, I don't think that you have a program like that. So you can't, I think.
How do you define who is a professional artist when you grant them grants? What kind of commission is selecting and what kind of criteria?
If it's
you have to be a member of this union, is it obligatory?
No. I mean, we're a free country. You don't have to be any union. But if you mean cultural endowment, then you don't have to be professional. I mean, it is more of the project that you have to be convincing enough for your peers. That's who. So there's, I mentioned that every 2 years there's a new committee. So you have to convince the committee that what you do is good, and you don't have to have an education. But when I mentioned the Creative Persons Act, so if you are unemployed and you can get money only if you're a creative person, then in that particular case, it is defined by copyright law. So basically it says that you have to have published something, that a work that falls under the category of copyright law in the past 3 years. That makes you active creative person. And the list is there: music piece, stage set, painting, book, whatever. So if you have in the past 3 years created something that falls on the category of copyright, then you are and then you get it automatically, whether you are a member of the association or not.
Thank you very much. It was clear.
Yeah, I from this question, yours, Vladimir, and Ragnar's answers, I just wanted to know if you have any status of artist law, or this support mechanism are like the status of artist law.
Yeah, as I mentioned, there is this one law which basically talks about giving this creative persons support, Creative Persons Act, and I can actually, I just put it in it's an English translation here as well. So if you're interested, you can read it. It is basically a Creative Persons and Associations Act. And the creative associations are basically the Soviet type unions. And why they are in the law is precisely because they are the ones that get the money and then distribute it as a grants if it's not spent. So that's why, I mean, anybody can have an artistic union. So it doesn't cover artistic unions as such, just those that are kind of a represent. And also it's important because I mentioned you that they get this 1.7 million euro. That is calculated in the budget as the total sum so they take all the members of all accredited unions, so those under the law, which cover, you know, all the sectors, and then like 1/5 for every person. So that is that you don't have to be the member, no problem. You can still get the money. It's just that in the budget, it is not then budgeted. And that's why I mentioned that in usual year, even if they only calculate from the people that are in those unions, and they calculate 1/5, it's still much, much, much more than actually these social guarantees are needed. But I mentioned that in the Corona time, when there was a huge amount of, you know, people who didn't earn anything because of the COVID restrictions, then that money was not enough, and then government put a lot more money in just to cover everybody who asks. But at least you will see how it's defined in the law. I put it in English.
Thank you. Yeah, Tamar, I think we can round up.
Maybe just last thing, how easy or how difficult was to get the tobacco and alcohol and the gambling money in Estonia? Did you have to fight for it, or
absolutely
convince someone or bribe in your terms?
No. Well, back then it wasn't maybe. I mentioned that this is an old kind of an old system, so it was a question of pride to get it up and running. And then, you know, in 1994, people felt that it was, you know, right thing to do. But later years, constantly, the Minister of Finance has wanted to open it up. They want to, you know, because they basically fight against fixing the national budget. That goes against, you know, usually the Minister of Finance. They want flexibility. And we know that if it's flexibility, then it means cutting. So and that is why it is called, and all culture policies always say that we do not want to open the law. So it's called a holy cow in our country. So there are things that maybe people want to change, but nobody, even they don't. Finally, for example, there in the First Republic, there was one more council for journalism. So there's a question: should we put the journalism back on? Another thing that people want to put in, and actually, well, the government does not support journalism putting in, because that part of journalism that is considered writing or literature is in anyway. But one thing that is, you know, back in 1920s was not existing, and now should be in, is design. Now design is somehow partly in the architecture as interior design, partly in the art, but it's really nowhere. So actually the government would like to create a design council. But the reason why we have never done it is precisely, if you go to the parliament, open it up, then you get like eagles to destroy the law. So nobody wants to touch it, and we rather get used to the complaints from the design sector than fight other ministries for that gambling and tobacco and alcohol tax automatic system. We
have also the situation, but in a black and white reverse, so that we cannot open the discussion to finance culture and arts. And in that sense, what would you recommend?
I mean, again, for me, this is a sign of a mature, Western, open, democratic society. If you look at how culture is funded in the Nordics, how it's funded in the UK, how it's funded in Germany, in other places, it is done mostly by those arts councils or endowments, not by the ministries. So, you know, for me, this is enough. I mean, for me, this is a good enough reasoning, but I know it's not always good enough in your countries.
Yeah, Ragnar, thanks a lot for a very insightful talk and a lot of interesting information. We spent around 2 hours now talking and answering the questions. So I think there will be more questions coming with time because we need time to digest this kind of information so much. So I really hope that we would have an opportunity to meet also face-to-face during a physical meeting sometime soon, maybe. I don't know. So I would suggest that we finish now our conversation here, our talk, which was one of the talks in a series of talks, because we are trying to get a little bit deeper in the issue of cultural funding, which is very different in every country, but at the same time, everyone needs it. So thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks a lot to the people who were with us tonight. And so it was really a pure pleasure to meet you once again.
Good luck to everybody. Bye.
Goodbye. Bye.
Bye-bye.